Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast.
Today we've got such an amazing conversation with Faisal Sidiqqui and Ian Barnard from the creative company talking about building a big brand on a small budget. And don't forget to stick around for the post-pod discussion with V and Marc.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Welcome to the show today. We have Faisal. Did I do that right? We just talked.
That was good.
Okay, good.
That was good.
Faisal Sidiqqui and Ian Barnard from the creative business company here. And we're going to chat about building a brand, a big brand on a small budget. And so you guys have this great thought leadership piece that you published last September. And so we're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff on this piece, but it's a really good piece. So thanks for sharing and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us, Vasilis and Marc. Appreciate it.
No problem. So I'll just start with a quick intro. Faisal, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time with that. Faisal.
We've got 1 hour. You have 1 hour
to get it right.
Right. Yeah. And then you'll go to the back of the class.
That is right, though, right? I am saying that correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Exactly.
So you are the founder of the creative business company, formerly the senior director of strategy and innovation at Profit, which is a really reputable agency for anyone who doesn't know, based out of the UK. I think it was David Ackers originally was the founder of that. With 15 years experience working in brand positioning and strategy. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And then Ian, you're the strategy director at Creative Business Company. Both of us have taken Mark Ritson's mini MBA courses. I know you've done both the brand management and the other one. So props, I guess. We're both,
Thank you.
Both alumni. And you used to work in Burlington, which is my hometown. I always affectionately refer to it as the center of the universe. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, let's get into this because this is a really interesting piece and you guys cover a lot of ground. I would call it in sort of the evidence-based world of modern marketing. There's a lot of material in here that you guys stitched together in a really thoughtful way. So why don't we start with some of the things that you guys have at the beginning, and that you really kind of talk about the 595 rule, which was one of the first things that I kind of stuck out for me. 595 rule associated with a publication from the Ehrenberg Bass and the B2B Institute. We've actually measured it with some of our clients and have validated that with a few clients in a few different industries. So I would love to hear your take on what the 595 rule is and why marketers should care about what that is.
Sure. So in a nutshell, I'll put it this way. If you only concentrate on the buyers that are currently within the market, who are actively looking to purchase your product, you're essentially eating your pie without growing your pie. That is the rule. And what do we mean by that? The Ehrenberg Bass Institute, that law, which originally was for B2B industries, but the principle still applies within B2B, suggests that over the course of a firm's longevity, the majority of their revenue will come from customers who are currently not active in the category. So what does that mean? If you're not active in the category, you don't have a need, and you probably don't even know that the brand exists.
Yeah.
And so from that basic principle, which is there's more gold on the other side of the fence rather than the people within the category right now, immediately it opens up a discussion around what types of messages and what types of channels are most appropriate for talking to the customers who are just in the category now versus those who are not in the category. And we use the moniker of current demand and future demand. So future demand is building the size of the pie, and current demand is eating your slice.
Gotcha. So when it comes to like that and thinking about the current demand, it's like in market, out of market is another way to say that.
Exactly.
And traditionally, you have a lot of people that would say things like, okay, well, we got to optimize everything for ROAS or some kind of an ROI, or we're going after, let's say, clicks instead of reach. Why is that hard for small companies to think about those things or to action that in market, out of market, or building the pie part?
Sure. Well, I think it's hard. It's definitely hard when their cost of acquisition is low. So when a company is in its early stages of development and the market is healthy, then you can very easily fish within the current category at a reasonable cost of acquisition. But as a category matures, and when we say mature, there's more competitors going after those same slices of pie. This analogy is going to wear thin really soon. So once all the competitors are going after the same pieces of pie, eventually the cost of acquiring a customer goes up and becomes prohibitive. So before you reach that point, why is it hard to invest in brand building or in marketing that speaks to future customers? Well, essentially you have to go to the CEO and say, or the CFO, and make an argument that we need to invest in tomorrow. And that's a hard thing to do when a lot of businesses have run rates and cash flow problems today. So it's betting on tomorrow. I think what we are seeing, though, is especially with a lot of the changes with iOS and the ability to precision target, that moment where the cost of acquisition using performance marketing only has arrived. The cost of acquisition has become prohibitive across the board. So what we actually find, a lot of our clients, and we are a full funnel, we call it performance brand agency, a lot of our clients happen to be heads of growth because they see that there's an argument investing in brand now. If this was 5 or 10 years ago, I don't think they would have even answered our phone calls.
So how much
what makes this...
Sorry,
go ahead, Mark.
No,
I was just going to say, so what makes this interesting, it's almost, I think as marketers, we can all agree that, yes, of course it makes sense to do investing in your brand upfront, make sure you're building up that, dare I use the term, the funnel, the intent, whatever you want to call it. What makes it difficult for companies to actually, especially smaller companies, to actually commit to that though? Is it because you mentioned sometimes it's those cash flow problems? Is it, marketers maybe in those settings being really myopic because they have finite budget? Why do you think small companies have a struggle in doing so?
Well, I've never worked client side, and Ian has, so I think he's probably better positioned to answer that question.
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is the idea that you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit of your quarterly revenue in order to get something, next year or the following quarter. And it's also the expense with the types of advertising that are usually associated with brand. So, I guess when I think of brand advertising, my thoughts go to like TV, out of home. I like to see big billboard campaigns, nice, sexy TV ads where you're not kind of directly selling a product. You're kind of talking about the brand in an interesting way. That media is really, really expensive for many and prohibitively expensive for smaller companies and startups. So they don't do it. So I think the combination of the expense required to get into that sort of category of advertising, and the fact that you don't have the immediate results or the ability to kind of track them in like handy dashboards, it makes it really difficult for a lot of marketers and smaller companies to kind of make that argument.
I'd also like to jump in, and add that brand marketers are not without guilt here, right? I think I think framing brand marketing as this very emo, purpose-driven, we're going to save the world, and this has nothing to do with the product, and we're going to make a 60-second anthem. I'm sorry, but you sound like the coloring in department. Go in the corner. And I think when brand marketers do things like that, they fundamentally don't add confidence in this topic of brand marketing. And I think one of the things that we try to do is we try to talk about brand marketing less in terms of emotional versus functional. And by the way, there's many types of emotion. Emotional doesn't mean emo. We don't talk about it like that. We talk about future demand and current demand. We just look a bit more mature, and we looked a bit less childish, I think.
Yeah.
And I think this idea that brand marketing is this big splash. We're going to have a purpose-driven campaign. We're going to sponsor some charity that has nothing to do with our product. It makes us look foolish, frankly. So there's blame on both sides.
Yeah, we did an interview with a guy named Dave Bunce, who's an accountant who runs a company. And so we were asking about accounting metrics for marketers. And why I'm bringing this up is because we got into a really interesting conversation about how important it is for marketers, especially brand marketers, to understand things like future cash flow, things like the capital budgeting process. And in my mind, those kinds of business metrics are critical for a brand marketer because you're trying to, as you said, build future demand in the market. And the future demand really represents where your future cash flows are going to come from. So in order for those people who are not in market today to really pick you, it's an interesting concept because you're right. Like if you go in there and go, oh, we're going to have this emotional brand campaign, and it's all about like, we want to make people cry and raise our, I don't know, brand awareness or brand affinity. I mean, that's one thing. But then if you talk about, this is about future cash flows, and you talk about like a capital budgeting process and where revenue is going to come from, then that's a whole other thing. And emotion is one of the tools. It doesn't mean you have to get people to cry. It just means you have to get noticed. And I think that's more about where the emotion fits in. And I noticed you guys talk about emotion in the creative component of this. And so I wanted to ask you about that. Like, is it really about like emotional campaigns? Do you have to make people cry, or is there something else that you can do with people?
So one of the saddest things about our industry is I don't think we study ourselves. And I think this also was a function of the large ad agencies. As costs were cut, a lot of training for young planners and creatives went out the window. So as an industry, we don't study what worked and what didn't and what good looks like. So if we look at the greatest ad campaign of all time, VW Think Small or Lemon, this is not trying to make anyone cry. We are using wit and intelligence to evoke the unique qualities of a product. If we think fast forward to Braniff Airlines, the end of the plane, again, we're using intelligence and wit and excitement to encourage a future customer to think about their brand when they enter the category. Same thing with Avis, we try harder. Who's trying to make anyone cry there? No one. And so when our generation of brand marketers or marketers full stop don't know those things, I think they assume brand marketing with a Nike ad. And they assume it with awe, wonder, inspiration. Systems One, formerly known as Brain Juicer, they had a good white paper. I forget the name of it. But they showed that there's actually kind of 9 sets of emotion, and underneath those 9, there's many more. So I just think this idea that I think brand marketers need to know what is the appropriate emotion to dramatize the unique qualities of their product or their company. And I think when you realize that actually fundamentally, one of the challenges is actually purpose-driven campaigns. Purpose-driven campaigns, people think that they're they inspire creativity. I don't think they do at all. They're incredibly conformative. They restrain creativity because they all conform to a very similar type of emotion that's being evoked. which is trying to make people cry and pulling on heartstrings. And the result of that is you have marketing campaigns and purpose-driven campaigns or brand campaigns that just look silly. You have the toilet paper company trying to talk about world peace.
Yeah.
Right? Or the mayonnaise company trying to motivate you to be your better self. This is just foolish. It's incredibly foolish. And so I think the challenge with this whole thing about overly emo is there's not a recognition of what type of category we are in. Some categories are what we call low engagement categories. And if you're a low engagement category, stop being the emo kid in the corner trying to talk about world peace. It's just foolish.
It actually, it's funny that you say that, because you almost feel like some of these brands really start reaching just to stay maybe relevant in some key social event or whatnot. Now, do you think that's a byproduct of structure, or is it a byproduct of just not understanding, how far the brand should go? Mark and I we did a podcast here, I think it was episode 4, where we talked about, brand, where does it live in an organization and whatnot? Is it marketing? Does it live outside of marketing? Do you feel like some of these smaller companies haven't actually figured out where to position or where to put their brand marketers, the brand team, to really kind of elevate that or create that right narrative for the company and actually look at the brand holistically versus it just being a campaign? Because it's not just a campaign. We talked about it being the frontline workers. They're a part of building your brand. It stretches far beyond anything creatively that our marketing team may put together.
100%. Yes, I think traditional org structures limit brand to comms, but I don't think that's an excuse. I think the best brand positionings unlock a hidden advantage. The best brand positionings align an organization around what makes them different. And so I think you may not have a mandate over product, but if you're not bothering to involve product when you're developing your brand campaign or when you're positioning your company, that's your fucking fault.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Even like we're talking about the differentiation between brand campaigns and say performance marketing, and you're saying, Faisal, about did I do that right again, Faisal? I don't know why I'm struggling.
It's Faisal, but it was
Faisal.
You're getting closer.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Don't apologize.
Okay. Faisal. Okay. So like the performance marketing thing, like I think a lot of times we're mislabeling this kind of information, because you've got on one hand brand where you go, and it is associated with things like emo, kids sitting in the corner, and like the coloring department, and we're going to make people cry and all that kind of stuff. And then on the other camp, you've got these people who are the performance marketers, are the ones driving revenue and leads and sales and that kind of stuff. And so I wonder how much in your experience you're seeing this. We've got, maybe there is a disconnect in terms of the labeling that we're putting on these things. Do you see that?
Yeah, but I think it's our fault. Oh, go ahead, Ian.
No, you go ahead, man.
No, you go, please. I'm getting tired of talking.
I mean, the labeling is one aspect of it, but I think that's, as we're both kind of Ritson alumni, like his mantra is Bothism. So I think we need both of these things working together to be a success. And whether you want to call it performance marketing or digital marketing or brand marketing, I'm less interested in about what we call it and more interested in the fact that are we using these two complementary tactics together in the right way to harvest the existing demand that's out there, which is the performance ads. Like, let's get all the people who are in the market who are currently shopping. We want to get their money. So we need to get those performance ads running. We also need to be creating future demand at the same time so that we can ensure like kind of long-term profits and revenue, which is where we need the brand. So I think regardless of what you want to call it, the fact is we need both of these things. They're both complementary to each other. They are slightly different skill sets, But a well-run company needs both of these things happening. Look, performance marketing is amazing, right? Like, this has been a revolution in advertising. It's allowed so many more companies to advertise their products and become successful, because it's a lot cheaper and more affordable and attainable for startups and small and medium-sized business companies. So I think it's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with performance marketing at all. I think most companies need to run some kind of short-term digital focused ads to harvest the demand. I think the problem is that a lot of the smaller companies have either forgotten or just not aware that they also need to be creating future demand at the same time, which typically means some kind of brand advertising thrown into the mix as well.
I would add to that, which is I think brand marketers fail to articulate the business case for brand marketing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because they couldn't say this brand marketing is going to drive some top of the funnel outcome, whatever that KPI is, and instead relied on silly metrics like impressions, or we're going to inspire this many people, or what have you. I think they gave performance marketing the opportunity to call themselves performance marketing. Yeah. And so my thought is, let's not cry over spilt milk. That was a bit of an own goal, frankly. I think the job right now for performance marketers is to better articulate the business case for brand marketing, in terms of the outcomes it drives in the top of the funnel. And the great news is, with freely available Google Analytics, companies can do that now without running quant surveys every quarter.
Yeah.
I love what you just said there, Faisal, because when you think about the positioning of a traditional brand marketer in an organization, they would shy away from things like understanding on-site metrics. They would shy away talking about revenue or even attributable revenue or understanding look-back windows, all those things that became synonymous with digital marketers. And that's why they would gain those seats at the table when it came down to, well, the split of the pie from a marketing budget perspective. Now, there's not a performance or a performance marketer in the world that wouldn't agree, hey, you can only go so far because you're just building off of intent or the intent that's already there. And that's happened somewhere. And it's not happening from my 50% off ad that's currently running in market. I'm capitalizing on that. So it's interesting now that, and I think we would all agree that maybe brand marketers need to shift and understand a little bit more of those metrics that performance marketers do have access to, and kind of create what is their narrative. So when they are pitching these ideas, like, it's not just about the feeling that a campaign will elicit. I'm also going to increase your brand search query volume by 15% over the next 60 days. That becomes tangible.
I think that's a great point. I think if anyone wants to see how to build the business case for brand marketing, go to the IPA, download the case study on how the AA added emotion. And it was a really good one because Les Binet was behind it. Look at all of the proxy metrics that they use to show the business contribution of brand marketing. So it was number of customer complaint calls, email opens. It was a whole bunch of other things that collectively showed that we can make this thing that was, a decade ago, very amorphous and hard to pin down, very, very tangible. And it's a very convincing case.
Yeah.
When we're talking about metrics, there's this other thing that, V and I have talked about this a lot, just on our own, but I think there's an illusion that performance marketers, myself included, have been in, where we think that because we can measure it and we can show like our 2% conversion rate or our 3% click-through rate and those kinds of things, that we know what's going on. And then in reality, a 2% conversion rate means there's 98% of the people that aren't converting. iOS and the recent update over the last couple of years and all the ad blocking and that kind of stuff has limited our visibility into the performance marketing funnel, if you want to call it that. And so we sit there looking at like even like a display ad, like a 0.01 click-through rate is, oh, that's way better than a 0.001. Like that's 99% people ignore or at least don't action that kind of thing. And it's funny because we ignore that part because we can't measure it, and then we get fixated on these tiny little numbers. So I just kind of wonder in your minds, like, how much of that part are we ignoring, and what kinds of metrics do you think are really important for us to kind of consider?
Well, I think I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but if you're looking at sort of the metrics better metrics for brand advertising, I mean, you can't measure brand advertising using the same metrics as performance. And that's where a lot of brand marketers are really struggling right now because they just can't do it. Like you can't show the ROAS on sort of a brand campaign that's going to take effect over a 6-month period. Mm-hmm. So that's where the trouble is. So you do have to look at the metrics and figure out what's the overall goal and how am I going to measure this in a way that's somewhat accurate.
Right.
I mean, the metrics could be anything. It really depends on what type of campaign you're running, the channel, the creative, the goal. Mm-hmm. But one that I like to use a lot is % audience reached. Mm-hmm. So with a brand campaign in general, obviously the idea is that we would need to reach your total addressable market. Mm-hmm. You're trying to reach as many people as possible. So you can look at the number of impressions or views or possibly even clicks of the ad and get a proxy for approximately how much of of the TAM have you reached over the period of the campaign. I think that's a good one. What other ones? I think ad recall is another good one as well. I think Facebook has that built into the platform, which is fantastic. But I like that one because it allows you to test the sort of memorability of your creative, which is important, and the messaging. So I think between those are two general ones that I would like to use: % audience reached and ad recall. And that gives you a good idea of how effective your messaging is.
Yeah.
And in terms of looking at results in the market as things happen, I think share of search is fantastic. If you haven't heard of that, I recommend anyone listening to go look that up. It's by a guy called James Hankins, and basically it uses freely available Google search data to measure the impact of brand campaigns and a lot of other things as well in the market.
Yeah,
I don't know if we're divulging state secrets, and Ian might get a bit mad. But I think one of the things we did was we were running a full funnel campaign for a charity that was raising donations. And we essentially created a 2x2 matrix. And on the y-axis, we used percentage of video viewed as a proxy for the brand components of the ads. And on the x-axis, you had ROAS. And then essentially the circles on the matrix were each individual piece of creative. And ideally, over the course of the campaign, you want to start top left. People are not going to buy or donate right on day one, but you want them to view the videos, you retarget them, and then over time, you can go to the bottom right, which is ROAS.
That's
so
a
there's
great
different
way
ways.
Yeah. No, that's a great way of actually visualizing that.
The just made me think, even when you're talking about some of the metrics, I've played around with Google consumer surveys a little bit, which is interesting because it's relatively cheap survey data that you can get your hands on. It's really affordable. The other one with why can't I think of it? James Hankins one, search.
Share search.
Yeah, share search. So the one I've found with that one is it's challenging on a small brand because if it's too small, there's not enough volume to really measure it. So that's a tricky one. I've played around with it. It's awesome as a concept, but the brand footprint needs to be big enough to even pull some of that data because you're only pulling 2 to 3% of all the search data as a representative sample. So it's good, but it's hard if the brand's really, really small. So yeah, that's interesting. So I wanted to chat with you now about switching into some of the challenges into some of the solutions you guys presented, because there's also some really interesting ideas there. And the 2-4-5 framework. Well, first of all, like, I know one of the things you guys promote in this thought leadership piece was really the concept around video being very powerful. Why is video powerful, and why is it useful for small brands specifically, or small companies trying to be big brands and make a dent?
Two reasons. One, it's cheap, and two, you can tell the story.
Okay.
And so cost per view is about 10 cents. CPC is a lot higher than that. And you can tell a story without, so let's zoom out. Our hypothesis was that being able to market to future customers, people who are currently not in your category, who don't have the need and may not be aware of your brand, it would be premature to ask them to buy something on your first touch with them. That's like trying to kind of convert on the first date.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. And so a more appropriate way to engage with them for the first time would be to entertain them. And video is a great way of doing that. Obviously, you still want to bring the message back to the brand.
Mm-hmm.
And so video is a good way of doing that. 15-second videos are very powerful. You tend to front load them as well with the logo first. You guys have all heard the stat, which is, now everyone has Spotify and can skip songs. Every single music song, kind of the beat hits earlier than a decade or 2 decades ago. And why is that? Because you want to grab the consumer's attention within the first 5 seconds. So if brand attribution is really important, we don't want to put the logo at the end. We put the logo at the start. Emotive videos, and they're cheap, and you can and target them widely. And there's not necessarily an ask to buy on those videos.
Yeah, so the objective isn't about a conversion or ROAS. Like, is it just about getting attention?
Correct.
Getting attention and then building some kind of association in the person's mind. You want them to think something favorable about you.
Right. So what's interesting about that now is, so you're suggesting video, and people are going to be like, or our listeners think, okay, how do I get into now the video part of this? And if you work with the Facebooks of the world, they're all, really forcing some of their quote unquote best practices, really short form snackable content, if you will, like the 5 seconds and whatnot. And you do go touch on this obviously in your white paper. But do you believe like there is a split in where you need to do that storytelling and you should be targeting 60 seconds or 30 seconds videos, and then you do create some of that snackable content, a little bit lower funnel video to kind of help nurture that intent? How would you suggest, I guess, marketers approach that space when it comes to duration of videos?
Ian, do you want to take that, or do you want me to go?
I'll start. I think that I think you need to do both. Is the short answer. So I think you need to have a bit of a longer story, because it just it takes time to tell a story and get people to think and feel something. So I think you do need some kind of 30 to 60 second spot. Interestingly enough, we've actually been chatting with some people at Google about the white paper, because it's very similar to what they're doing with their clients in terms of best practices and experiments with YouTube and video content. And they found that length really doesn't matter after a certain point. So they find that it really comes down to the creative. If the creative is good, if the video is interesting and people like it, it doesn't really matter if it's 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds. They've had videos on their end that are like 2 minutes or more that get like really, really good performance, because the videos are good and they're targeted at the right people. So whether it's 30, 60 or more, I think you do need one piece of good, let's just call it long form video content. but then you need to chop that up into smaller pieces. And this idea, we've called the 2-4-5 framework. It's not our framework originally. It came from a company called Born Social. They're an agency in the UK, and they wrote a white paper called Brand Building on Social Media, where they laid out this framework where you have a hero piece of content, which is 30, 60 seconds or more. And you chop that down into smaller 15-second pieces, and then further down into like sort of short clips and GIFs. And the further down you go in the funnel and the shorter the content, the more action-oriented it becomes. So you have your big hero piece of content, which is we'll just call it pure brand. Then as you work your way further down the funnel with the content, you can start adding calls to action. So that's where you can say like, buy now, click here, shop today, that kind of thing. So really what you're doing is from one piece of video, you're able to create a full funnel marketing campaign that hits people at all the different points of the stage. So they're not ready to buy. They don't know who you are. You introduce them to the brand with this interesting longer piece of video. Then you can follow up, retarget them afterwards with the shorter content in order to get them to the website and to buy something.
One of my pet peeves, and I don't know if you all will agree, is sometimes you'll see these big hero moment videos that will last, 30 or 60 seconds, but they make it skippable after 5 seconds, which for example, kind of defeats the purpose. Like if you wanted to make a 5-second video, then make a 5-second video for that point of in your funnel. If you're creating that hero content and making it skippable after 5 seconds, that maybe your logo didn't come up, or some of those other best practices where you look at, I feel like you as marketers there, or digital marketers, you've kind of missed the mark in that opportunity to capture some level of engagement or intent up front. Would you guys agree with that sentiment, or do you feel like, no, actually making that 5-second skippable is actually a good thing?
I think the medium informs the message. And so to your point, if it is skippable, you need to front load the message, and leaving the other 55 seconds less important. I don't know. I think that's perhaps not the greatest use of your production budget. Not to say you can't have both. You certainly can have both. But I think going back to Ian's point, like the big, at the start of the show, we were talking about how brand marketing is considered quite expensive. We've said it was unaccountable and also expensive. So the accountable side, I think we've talked about. The expensive side, the two unlocks are one, digital video versus say TV. There's also kind of, you can get kind of digital TV spots, which are somewhat affordable as well. That's the first unlock. Radio and print are also good. The second unlock is what we're talking about now, which is we believe you can pool your production costs and develop a year's worth of ads in one go. So if you're smart enough around A, the positioning of your brand, and B, your calendar of marketing activities for the next 12 months, there's no reason why you have to go on set twice. And in our discussion with Ruben at Google, another fact that he was saying was this notion of wear out, that your assets is actually false. He's seen pieces of creative that'll last 8, 9, 10 months. So if you think about that, and if you're smart enough to kind of plan ahead, you have a very clear positioning for your company. You know how that trickles down into each one of your campaigns. You can think 12 months in advance. You can go on set once, create the master kind of the hero pieces of creative. Maybe you have 2, doesn't matter. Chop that into 15s, and then you can produce a year's worth of creative in a single go. And that's one way, again, how we can make brand marketing a bit more affordable for smaller to medium-sized businesses.
It's interesting. We've been running a few different campaigns for different clients, and I got fed up. Like I was when V and I worked together at Sport Check, FGL Sports. I ran all kinds of brand campaigns and performance marketing campaigns. So I was sitting on both sides of the fence. And for the longest time, it was all about, snackable content, short form video, really bite-sized pieces and that kind of thing. And, I looked at the 5-second rule on YouTube, or the 5-second skippable thing, and all the front loading thing is really important, because if nothing else, you get that for free. You only get charged when it hits the 30-second mark. So then that's really an interesting opportunity, because you get all these first 5-second impressions for no cost at all, really. So it's really important to front load it. I always think about it as sort of the inverted pyramid, the journalist inverted pyramid, where you tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you told them, and give people a reason to want to watch past the 5 seconds. Fast forward a couple of years, and then recently, over the last few years, we've been working with a client, and they wanted to produce like kind of a cooking show kind of thing for their brand. And so we made 10-minute, almost 11-minute videos. We put them on YouTube, and we were getting an average 4-minute watch time, which is completely contra to what all the like best practices were of, snackable short format content. So it's a really interesting place, because to your point, Ian, I mean, you could tell a story, and it doesn't, you have a way longer period of time than you ever thought you did. Plus you can, and to your point, Faisal, we can target things like television sets. Roku's now got an advertising platform, so you can get on Roku television sets. It's a really interesting space, because there's way more digital video inventory out there than there ever was before, and it doesn't have to just be on a mobile device.
100%. That reminds me, I was smiling a bit, because one of the greatest, I thought, really, really good kind of, let's call it infotainment / brand entertainment, was Marco Pierre White with his little Knorr stock pots. So Knorr, which makes stock pots, would have, it's all on YouTube if you're into like cooking. Anything kind of Marco Pierre White does, you kind of find. But he has these, like, he'll cook a recipe, and he'll use the Knorr stock pot. And I don't know, I've seen all of them, and they're all kind of like 2 to 4 minutes. They're all 2 to 4 minutes long. And, the majority of them, I don't know what that Knorr stock pot is doing in that recipe, but you're like, okay, whatever. And it's well branded, and it's good. So 100%. I think, this is not new, right? P&G used to sponsor soap operas in the 50s and 60s. Yeah. So I think, I don't know, I think it just always goes back to the more our industry knows ourselves and studies our own history, the answers are there. We don't really have to, not everything is so new as we think it is, despite what you hear from people at conferences on innovation and this and that.
Overall, I mean, I know you guys promote the 60-40 split, which is, really well researched and really well documented from Benet and Field in terms of the long and short of it. When it comes to building up that 2-4-5 framework, how would you take that 60-40 split on that model?
I don't know if you would tie it to the model specifically, but to me, 60-40 comes down to, like, so there's tofu top line, and then there's bofu bottom of the funnel. And I suppose the tofu would mostly be the hero content. So your 30, 60, 90 minutes video. I would put that into the mix of your tofu media spend. And then I would use the shorter form content, like the 15 seconds or the GIF reminders, as a call to action. We did that really successfully with Penny Appeal, a Canadian charity, last year for Ramadan. We had the hero piece of content, which I think was I think there were actually 15 second clips, which told a nice little story. We pumped those out to as many people as we could. And then we followed up on all those people with a retargeting campaign with these shorter clips with the calls to action. And it was a huge success. I think they raised over $3.5 million during the month of Ramadan. So we know this works really well. It was nice to see that the 60-40 can be applied to a bit of a different setting, a smaller Canadian charity as opposed to a massive sort of P&G type company. But it worked really well. So I think that the 60-40 overall still holds, and Yeah, I would say like prioritize the 60% of your spend into the longer form video content,
Mm-hmm.
and then use the 40 for the more targeted digital follow-ups.
Interesting story about that campaign, but the 60-second anthem was the most highest performing asset we created out of everything.
Amazing.
It drove the most donations. And so that tells you that the more your brand messages are rooted in an ownable product truth and not about some category platitudes about saving the world, these things can perform. So I challenge the notion that brand marketing will only drive sales maybe 12 months from now.
Mm-hmm.
I think if it's done right, especially for smaller challenger brands, I don't think that argument works. You can't say, hey, this piece of creative is going to produce some effect way down the line.
Mm-hmm.
Even your brand stuff should sell, maybe not to the same degree as a bottom of the funnel, like a Bofu asset, but why not?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think the answer to that is frankly positioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more every single piece of comm is rooted in what we call the hidden advantage of an organization, of a brand, every piece should sell. So for us, when you go in with that mentality, it becomes less of a trade-off.
Yeah,
these are just doing different things.
It's super interesting. I heard you talk about that campaign. I think it was on Steph Hammerlink's podcast. But what I thought was really interesting is when you were putting that in a market, because if I remember correctly, it was different timing for the tofu and bofu parts. I also would be super interested to hear about the optimization of the media. Like, did you look at the brand stuff as we're going to optimize for clicks or conversions, or was it about reach? And same for the bottom of the funnel stuff. So could you talk about when and how you optimize?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer the first part. Ian can answer the second part. So traditionally within Ramadan, if you're non-Muslim, you probably won't know this, but Ramadan is the greatest exchange of money in history. There's about 1 billion Muslims, and they have to donate. So it is a competition. It's kind of it sounds a bit unspiritual to say that, but it is a competition between different charities to go get that money. So you have literally charities counterbidding each other, right? It is a total gold rush. Yeah. Now, within Ramadan, what happens is you'll notice is often like Muslims will, it's called zakat, and they have to give 10% of their money to charity rule. And so what will happen is they'll usually give that money towards the back end of the month. So what happens is that the ad buys and the cost for those ads go up with every single day. Mm-hmm. So the innovative, I suppose, and we also have to give credit to the media agency who worked with us. It wasn't just us. The innovative thought was, let's start 1 month before. Right. Let's start 1 month before with our brand assets. We kept the brand assets running throughout the month, but we essentially bought media at a time when it was cheap, and then retargeted people who had viewed those or engaged with that media at a time when it was expensive. And so that was the kind of killer unlock for that campaign. In terms of optimization, Ian, do you remember what some of the kind of key insights of that was?
I think we covered it a little bit earlier, but it was kind of going back to our conversation over metrics and that dashboard that you mentioned. But long story short, in the first month of the campaign before Ramadan started, we prioritized the 60-second video, and we were going for % audience reach. So we were trying to reach as many Muslims in Canada as we could. And then we were looking at things like ad recall throughout, just to make sure that it was getting noticed and people were watching it. And then once Ramadan started, we introduced the Bofu assets into the mix. So the stronger calls to action, we retarget all the people who had watched the video in the previous 4 weeks. And that's when we started looking at all the videos as a whole on the dashboard and saying, well, now the closer that we move to the end of Ramadan, the more we need to get focused on getting donations. So we're going to take spend away from the videos that are getting watched but not driving action, and spend more money on the videos that are resulting in more clicks and more donations.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit like Black Friday of charities. It sounds like.
Yes.
It is. Well, it's funny you joke about that, but there's so within Ramadan, there's this idea that the last 10 nights are really holy, and so a lot of Muslims donate on those last 10 nights. There are even apps that automate that donation, so you just give the
Oh wow!
you give the app your money, and it'll automatically donate for you to a select charity on every single night. So that, who says religion is not innovative? And
There's an app for that.
There's an app for that.
Yeah. But we were as shocked when we first started working within that category. We were as shocked as perhaps you were to the commercialization of this time of month.
Well, we really appreciate you guys sharing like that case study and its entirety. I think it gives our listeners a kind of good framework there to kind of like think about it. Say, hey, is there an opportunity to early up? So maybe you can get your dollars get stretched a little bit further. In your opinions, and this may be an oversimplification, but do you believe it actually the effectiveness of any campaign really comes down to the way your spend is being allocated?
Yes, and I think it's also has to do with the message. It's not just the investment. I think being able to have a differentiated message that cascades across the funnel is super important, and we firmly believe that purpose gets in the way of that, because purpose just feels like a top of funnel thing, but a clear positioning should cascade. So the New York Times, for example, like even in their bottom of the funnel subscriber messages, they have a mission oriented message. So they'll say, what was the thing? Fight for the truth. Subscriptions are now 20% off.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see how the positioning of the company cascades all the way down, even into the direct response activities. I think that's critical.
Right. That's a great point.
I think with the creative too, if you are going
such
to
an
try
interesting conversation and such an interesting approach. It's so thoughtful the way you guys have laid this out. I really think it's a practical tool, I guess you could call it that, for anybody really. And I know it's intended for small brands, but it feels like it scales to just about any company. It doesn't have to be for small brands, I don't think.
Well, thank you. I think we positioned it for small brands because that is our position in the market, and that's where we are. If we'd happily talk to bigger brands as well. And again, I think a lot of the principles, to your point, you made a good point, which is they're applicable to any size company, frankly.
Yeah. Except,
actually, there's an exception. If you're a bank or a telco in Canada with no competition, then don't read our white paper because you don't need it, because you don't really have to try.
Okay. Noted.
How can people find out more about you guys and what you're working on and the paper and everything?
So you can check us out on our website, creativebusinesscompany.com. You can check us out on LinkedIn. We post quite often there, maybe annoyingly, maybe not. And we're also on Twitter. And so my Twitter handle is Faisal Don't Bunt. And that was from the David Ogilvy, which is like don't bunt, swing for the fences.
Yeah.
And Ian Barnard is what Ian, you're like mixes in the attic.
Yeah, mixes in the attic.
I love these names.
Yeah,
I love them. And when you said bunt, I thought like head bunt actually. So I'm happy that you clarified that it was like a bat.
Yeah, bunt. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. We're not trying to get to first base. We're going for it.
Going for dingers. I love it.
We're going for dingers, but it's multi-touch. It's multi-touch, not on one try.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
So good.
Boys, this has been great, man. Really appreciate your insights and your willingness to share. And I know our listeners will eat this content up. So thank you very much for spending the time with us today.
Thanks, V. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. It was great.
Thank you.
Awesome.
And now the post-pod discussion with V and Marc. Post-pod?
Post-pod. Let's go. Another great conversation.
Yeah. I really like that conversation. I think, and I got to apologize to Faisal for butchering his name so many times. So Faisal, I'm really sorry. I don't know why I couldn't get the name straight, but it was just... it was just one of those things. I kept writing it out how I thought it should sound, and then Anyway, Faisal.
I gotta ask, how many different spellings did you write down for his name?
4. I started with, and then I was trying to spell it phonetically, and then I kept butchering that too, because then I'd write how I thought it should sound. Anyway, Faisal, I'm really sorry, but a great conversation, I thought.
100%.
So interesting, and especially because it, in my mind, it was really there's a lot of theory that they talk about, but it's applied, and so that it becomes real for a lot of brands.
Well, I think we covered a few things. Obviously, we talked about the 595 rule, which I think a lot of us intuitively know about it, but we forget about it, right? Yeah. Then they talked into the 245 as well, and I think it's super interesting how to make sure that we talk about frameworks, and here's another way to kind of like look at it and making sure that you're aligning your tactics to your creative, to your spend, to all these things. I even love the conversation just around understanding the case study that they brought forth, that charity, the Ramadan charity that they did. It really, for me at least, it made it really tangible in the way that they approached and really drive a result for their clients.
Totally. It also made me think about, like we talked about a little bit of Google consumer surveys, and there's a marketing budget overall. And oftentimes we think, okay, well, we got to put it all into either ad spend and creative, or some combination of those things, depending on the size of the company. You may have PR that could be, or maybe isn't included, sponsorship, content. There's lots of ways you can divvy up a marketing budget. Mm-hmm. The one thing, especially for small brands, though, that I feel is often overlooked is the research part. And so if you're a brand that's just relying on Google or Facebook to give you the answers of how your marketing is working, you're only going to be able to report what they tell you, which isn't your business goals and objectives. And so for me, one of the things that kind of was really important, I thought, especially if you're talking about understanding how much you're influencing the future cash flows of the market, and that market penetration number that Ian was talking about, like Google consumer surveys and things like that is a really affordable way to target the overall audience that you're trying to. It's like research. It's legitimate research that costs very little and can give any brand of any size a really, really good read on what they're doing to influence the perceptions of the company in the minds of the customers.
Yeah, I'm looking away right now because I went back to my notes. It was episode 1, the one that you did with Mary, and she talked about how often are you actually, doing or going through your consumer insights, but how often do you get it? So if you are a smaller brand, there are ways to get it where you're not over-investing, or you're not assigning some of these bigger firms to do this qualitative research for you. But it's still such a big part of the process that sometimes it gets overlooked, and what you end up doing is just relying on the opinions of those decision makers in the business. Well, who do you think we should be targeting, Mark? You're the CEO. Who should we be targeting? We don't have money to, invest 50, 100K on some of those big research firms and what they do for you. I'm not saying it's not justified. Like I've seen some great research, obviously, and it warrants the price tag. Sure. But there is a level that you can do that as a smaller brand to get that insights and be data driven in your approach that will help inform then your content strategy, the content, the way you put out, the digital channels you choose to invest in. And Ian also did talk about, we talked about performance marketing and brand. And what's interesting is, and I think you and I agree in this notion that it's unfortunate that we've created a divide in marketing and saying there's only one group that actually drives performance. The reality is marketing should be viewed as performance. right?
Mhm.
Because it's, at the end of the day, it is driving revenue for the company or
Yeah.
whatever KPI it's measuring. But it's always going to be a balance. It's always about balance. So you
Mhm.
need to make sure you're storytelling up front. You need to make sure
Yeah.
that you're creating the right remarketing strategies that would fall under a traditional performance marketing discipline. To make sure that you're constantly nurturing that demand, but also doing the best you can to convert on it.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things like in their white paper. I really recommend anybody that is interested to download the white paper because it's one of those.
We'll put it in the show
like-
notes.
Sure. Yeah. Great call. It's one of those things for me where there's a really like a ton of great references in there. And so to really sound research and evidence for marketers. So, for that alone, it's a great jumping off point to dig into other areas. One of the things that it made me think about is they have a piece about how it's important to focus your messages rather than trying to say 18 things. Focus your message on one thing because it has better impact. And so when I think about that, I kind of think about like each of those sections we were talking about, like the brand piece or the tofu piece. That kind of brand, like there's so much that we assume people know.
Right.
And, linking that idea to Google consumer surveys, to even the dark funnel stuff that we talked about with Chris Walker. Like we assume people, because we're in the company, that people know what the company is and what they do.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is most people probably don't know. Most potential customers, especially future customers, have no idea. So one of the things I think is really important is, it can be as simple as, and this is where emotion, I think, links to that, is you can use all different kinds of emotions, not in necessarily one campaign or asset, but pick an emotion, and there's like 9 that Faisal talked about, and then sub ones underneath that from system 1. And so pick one of those messages to use a vehicle to tell people who your company is with a well-branded video and what they do, because it's not clear to everybody. And you can even measure that using Google consumer surveys. And thinking back to the episode we did with Chris Walker talking about the dark funnel, I just watched a bit of a webinar on that. And they were saying, like in a B2B sense, the dark funnel is the part that you're not measuring. You're getting really focused and obsessed with looking at leads, lead gen, MQLs, SQLs. But there's this other part of the funnel that you're not even paying attention to. And so that's the part where I go, okay, well, that's where surveys kick in. Like the top of the funnel, if you want to use the funnel analogy. Yeah. That's really dark if you just use Google and Facebook, because they're not telling you what the market thinks about and what they know about.
That's great.
So like, it's such an interesting piece because it doesn't actually have to be complicated. I think that was one of their messages. No, people really don't generally know a lot about your company. Don't assume that they do. So start there, and then you can work out from there.
But it's also like, would you, and I know we talked about it in the pod, but I think like as marketers, where we still struggle is we're great storytellers externally, right? Putting together some amazing spots, some sound media strategies and whatnot. We're horrible storytelling internally. We cannot tell our story internally. Yeah. And I think that's where we're getting some of that struggle of buy-in, if you will. Yep. And I know Faisal and Ian both touched on this and saying, like, what are those metrics that we have to start leaning on? Yeah. Make sure that brand marketers are a lot more comfortable in the idea of saying, you know what, we're going to make what we're trying to achieve really tangible for you. And it could be, I wrote some of those things down, like the percent of audience reached. We talked about the share of search. Yeah. We talked about, looking at your audience. Is it by clicks? Is it by impressions? Is it by ad recall? All these things, but put those up front. And when you level set with an organization or the C-suite or whatever the case may be for your organization, say, I'm anticipating a 15% growth, 50% ad recall, blah, 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 blah. Then at the end of the campaign, you can go back and say, so here were the metrics, here are the benchmarks, the industry benchmarks for our space. Yeah. Here's how we fared.
Yeah.
that
Well,
becomes tangible.
Totally. There's things like, moving from the funnel analogy to the consumer decision journey analogy from McKinsey.
Yeah.
One of the things they found in their research was that for brands that are top of mind, which is in that, the first part of the consumer decision journey, that their model, those brands are 3 times more likely than brands that aren't top of mind to be picked at the moment of purchase.
Right.
So, like, there's stuff like that where you go, okay, well, if that's true, and everybody talks about, top of mind awareness is really important, but like, top of mind awareness about what? Like, that's where it's so interesting. You know what I mean? It's not just about people know your company name. It's like, what do they know you for?
Yeah.
And especially from the customer's point of view, like, when should they think of you? And like, if you talk about that, then you can link brand campaigns to future cash flows. And then the stuff we talked about, well, Dave's episode isn't out yet, but it's coming out. And by the time this is published, it will be out. Like, those accounting metrics then become really valuable for being able to tell that story internally.
100%.
And it's so, like, it's starting to come together in my mind, V. Like, I think there's a lot of really good evidence that we can all rely on and count on. And we don't have to make it up. We don't have to be that coloring department sitting in the corner with the emo kid like Faisal was talking about.
No, we should not be shying away from those difficult conversations around the business. We should be, as marketers, we should be well-versed in the understanding of cash flows, even understanding in a very primitive form, potentially how, the marketing budget is actually created internally. I know in Dave's podcast that, hopefully our listeners would have listened to by now, but really goes into articulating some of those things that we should be arming ourselves with to make sure that not only are we holding our own in that space, we can be thought leaders outside of just, what is that right campaign? What is the right emotion we need to elicit? And being constructive in our ability to drive business decisions as the marketing discipline in the organization. Because remember, we're one of the groups that are probably a lot closer to the voice of the guest, right? Outside of the frontline people that would be an organization. We're the ones that are closest to understanding that consumer, the needs, the wants. So our voice at that table should be relatively loud, but often it's getting overshadowed. And it's unfortunate.
That's a really good point, because you're right. I mean, even if you didn't do Google consumer surveys or some kind of consumer research, what are you basing your brand messaging off of? Like, then it really becomes important to talk to the salespeople, the frontline people. And we were talking about it during the podcast, like, how important are those people in developing the brand? Because then at least you have some, and that costs nothing to sit in a customer call or watch them as they're shopping at your store or whatever. So you can understand the questions they have, the needs they have. And then that's how you can build your messaging. So you're right. I think, like, there's so much that marketers could be doing that costs almost nothing, just to understand the customers really well. And then developing the creative, as opposed to just, like, I don't know, throwing a dart at a board, just hoping for any kind of message that might be up there. It doesn't have to be a guess. It can absolutely be supported with information and data and that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to be like grandiose research projects. It can be super practical and super easy to do.
Faisal even said this, and I like the way he articulated it, where he suggested that, as marketers, let's just do our research in the history of marketing. There's a lot there that already exists that can help essentially create that framework that you're looking for. You don't have to look for the latest and the greatest. Not everyone's going to create an Oreo campaign. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen, right? If you read the case study around that, the amount of hours that went into planning for that moment in time that, hey, maybe the power goes out during the Super Bowl. Well, I'm sorry. Smaller companies don't have that luxury to spend that kind of brain power thinking about all the different outcomes that could happen. But at the end of the day, we're constantly using those things as North Stars, where it's like sometimes they're intangible in the sense that I can't apply that in my day to day.
Totally.
But we all want it.
Yeah. Well, and I like how you phrase that too, because then the 2-4-5 model that they were talking about in terms of creating content, it becomes more intentional. It's not just about go make a video. It's, if we're going to make a video, which is probably a good idea, then what do we need to get out of it? So if you use just that model on its own, even as like a sketch to then fill in the blanks, when you go into your shoot and do your concept outline and that kind of stuff, then you've got this like document that shows what the outputs are going to be and how you can use it. So you do one shoot, still the one shoot, but then what comes out of that one shoot are all these assets that you can then leverage for different things. And as Faisal was saying, like you can use that for a long period of time. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be like brand new every month or every couple of weeks. Like it can be something that you use for a long period of time.
Well, if you're creating a new brand story every month or every quarter, you're probably not thinking about brand the right way, if I'm being honest. You know, like I think you look at it and say, what's that hero content that we need to create for the year? Potentially, what is that narrative that I want to create for 2023, for example, right? You create that content, but then when you're talking about, Bofu, well, that's when you can kind of do some of that snackable content, right? Where you can say, well, you know what, I'm going to have a few more sales messages in there that align to my seasonality, blah, blah, blah. But the hero content is still the hero content that's driving that affinity for the duration of even up to a year. Why can't you use that content for up to a year? Yeah.
Well, it's funny because when you think about like so many, we talked about models lots. And like in this conversation
we talk about,
I know, but it's interesting because the models shape how you think about things. So if you think about the ADA, awareness, interest, desire, action, like the funnel, it's very static. We were also just recording one with Dan White, and he's got his analogy about a lazy river, right? And so if you think about the lazy river model, that's where you've got these people floating through the river. And at one point is when they make a purchase. The rest of the way around, they're not really thinking about the brand at all.
No.
So if you're marketing and trying to reach all of those people so that when they do come back around to the point of purchase, then they know about you, they choose you, they prefer you, they know why they should think of it, when they should think of you, and all those kinds of things. Then that single asset can be really productive because you're trying to reach all those people. And if you're just using second layer, third layer retargeting as people have watched a certain amount of the video, then they're getting retargeted with more call to action messages. What you're trying to do then is reach as many people as you can, and then retargeting people as they're getting closer with their intent data that they've watched the video or they've visited web pages. And so it's like a single shoot can serve a whole bunch of needs, because we know people that had just gone through the purchase cycle probably aren't going to be purchasing again for a little while, unless it's something super fast like chocolate bars or whatever. But you know what I mean? Like it doesn't, not everybody's buying now. So then it changes the way you perceive the usefulness of content. It's way more about reach than it is about high frequency of, and conversion rates. You know what I mean? Like there's a balance there that I think is super interesting.
No, I couldn't agree more with that statement, Mark, honestly, because when I think about, I know we've done retail together up till recently. I was in the airline industry, even before that in direct to consumer online betting and whatnot. The interesting thing about all of those things is very simple. From a marketing perspective, you can map the behavioral signals that you want to create content against.
Right.
We do not do that enough as marketers. And sometimes it comes down to resources. Sometimes it comes down to funding. It can come down to a million things. But I think fundamentally marketers have to say, what are those 3 key signals that we want to map content against? And it could be awareness upfront, right? So how am I driving the message of who I am, what I do, the service I
When should you think of me? Yeah.
Exactly. The second has to be then the moment that you've engaged with me, how do I make sure that I can re-articulate what it is that I'm selling potentially? So what is that behavioral signal that you want to incite there at that second level? And finally, it's like, you've seen 2 pieces of content from me. Now I need an action from you. So I'm also giving you a discount, for example. But these things are happening. I hate using the word silos, but it is siloed. Because you have one part of the company that's working on the lower funnel tactics, the sale activation, and they're leaning on their email databases more than they should. You have your brand marketers that are upfront just trying to drive their awareness, but that gray area, the middle area, whose responsibility is that? Is that a performance marketing responsibility, or is that a brand responsibility?
Totally.
It's a marketing responsibility.
Yeah.
But where does it live?
Yeah. The other part that I love about that too, as you were saying that, is it made me think about how practical it is then to do a single shoot. Because then when people are being exposed to, and like the people who are getting the reach message or the brand message they're not getting that at the same time that they're getting the discount that we talked about at the bottom, right?
Exactly.
Because of when they're consuming it or how we're targeting them. But with having a single shoot, you're actually leveraging the same assets and the same branding. So that when somebody sees it, they go, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember the thing that, or the people or the storyline or whatever. And so there's brand consistency throughout those messages as well, just with the distinctive assets you're using and the logo, all those. So it's such an interesting model.
And I think being a smaller company, if we're tying this back to like the topic today, if you're a smaller company, you have the ability to really kind of test and find that for yourself as well.
Yeah.
When you have some of these brands that have been established, there's obviously positives in that because they have an identity or they have already some equity in their product or service. But if you're a young brand, you play with that. Like you're not bound to something specific. So have fun with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. What a good pod.
Another great one, man.
I loved it. This is getting
great.
fun, Pete.
Dude, I'm really enjoying myself doing these things. And obviously, like our guests have been amazing. Shout out to all of our guests that have been on the show with us, and looking forward to the roster that we have lined up. But I hope our listeners are enjoying and interacting with this content because we love creating it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, until the next time, B. Thanks, man.